The return of hit-scan guns from Chapter 5's projectile weapons was a much-needed change. However, it sparked an interesting debate from the community, specifically regarding a certain gun this season. And I get it, the Hollow Twister Assault Rifle is one of the most broken guns we've had in a long time, but a lot of people are using this as an excuse to say that returning to hit-scan destroyed the balance of the game, which is a little bit misguided. See, Fortnite has had a long and controversial history when it comes to scoped weapons. From borderline unusable to ridiculously overpowered, scoped weapons have always been a polarizing topic. Today, we're going to look at the history of Fortnite's first-person guns and find out where they went wrong and how Epic can fix them in the future. Quick side note, when I say scoped weapons, I'm specifically referring to the automatic assault rifles and SMGs like the MK7 or the Hyper SMG. Snipers and DMRs are kind of boring, so I won't be talking about them today. So, the very first-person AR. I think a lot of people will automatically think of the MK7, but we're going all the way back and talking about the actual first scoped assault rifle, the scoped assault rifle. This is probably the closest that Epic has ever gotten to a perfectly balanced scoped AR. A lot of people will tell you that this gun was terrible, but it really wasn't. And I have two theories on why people thought that, and I'll get to that in a second, but first let me explain why this was the perfect scoped AR. Its damage and DPS weren't amazing, but it was the only hit scan gun in Chapter 1 with 100% accuracy and no damage fall off at range. Let that sink in. If you had really good aim in Chapter 1, this gun would outclass every other AR by miles. Its only weakness was close to mid-range where a SCAR would be more effective, but that's why it was balanced. Not every gun has to be perfect in every situation, which is why I think the original scoped AR was the best one to ever exist. But not everyone agrees with that, and I think I know why. Reason number 1. People were just using it wrong. Despite being hit scan with 100% accuracy, the gun would shoot sort of a tracer round, so it looked like the bullet was a projectile. This meant a lot of people would lead their shots and wonder why they weren't hitting. And reason 2. The scoped AR got heavily reworked in Chapter 2, where it lost fire rate in exchange for damage, but more importantly, they removed its 100% accuracy and added range fall off. Here are the stats of the Chapter 2 version. I couldn't find accurate stats of the Chapter 1 version, because for some reason it was scrubbed from the wiki, but you can see how insane it was from the clips. If you've used the scoped AR in creative recently, you probably haven't hit many shots with it because now it has bloom like every other gun. And if you say, well, the scoped AR in OG is bad too, that's just because they added the wrong one for some reason. It's not supposed to be doing that. Anyway, I've made my point here. Since I think this AR was the perfect specimen, I'll be using it to compare all the future guns moving forward. So now we can move on to the second first-person gun ever added, the one you've all been waiting for, the thermal scoped AR. Boasting even less fire rate, a smaller mag, and a useless thermal scope, we have one of the worst guns of Chapter 1. The thermal did have a bit more damage than the scope, but when you compare the stats, you're better off just using the original. The fact that it shot so slow meant that you'd be lucky to even get a second shot off before your opponent placed a wall. The entire gimmick of this gun was the brand new thermal scope, which was basically useless because the entire map looked like this and everyone was wearing skins that looked like these. Do you see them? I don't know, might have to take out the thermal scope for this one. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that Epic knew that scoped ARs were a delicate balance that they were sort of afraid to disturb. In fact, there wasn't a single new scoped AR added in Chapter 2. But that all changed in Chapter 3 when Epic decided they were done making balanced guns. And that of course brings us to everyone's favorite AR and possibly the most overpowered gun ever added, the MK7. If you're unfamiliar, the MK was sort of like the scoped AR except with a few small tweaks like, 4 times the DPS, 4 times the fire rate, and double the mag size. Here's the full stat comparison, and there's one more thing to mention. These are the final stats after 5 nerfs, meaning that it was even more broken on release. Here's what the actual stats would have looked like for the mythic MK back then. Now, this gun did have a bit of a skill requirement with the amount of recoil it had, but that didn't stop people from absolutely shredding with it. It honestly surprises me that Chapter 3 Season 1 is still widely regarded as an amazing season, even though most Fortnite players are quick to nitpick any item that's even remotely overpowered. But a big reason for that is because builds mode was the only option at the time, meaning if you had a fast enough reaction, you could mitigate a lot of damage from the MK. But that all changed the very next season when Zero Builds was introduced. Epic was quick to pick up that a lot of players really liked the new hollow sight style weapons, and so, over the next several seasons, they added a bunch of new ones. Some were better than others, but the bottom line is any AR with 100% accuracy was guaranteed to be really good. Perhaps too good. See, unlike in builds mode, there's no way to defend against these weapons in zero builds. If you're caught in the open with no bunkers or good movement, you're basically screwed. The meta in zero builds became sorta campy around chapter 4 because if you saw a person before they saw you, you could just beam them before they had a chance to react. This was honestly super fun to do when you had the advantage, but no one wants to be at the receiving end of it. And that's why I think weapons that don't even give your opponent a chance to fight back are super unfair. It's the same complaint that a lot of people have with snipers. It's not even a skill issue. If your opponent's good enough, they can eliminate you before you can even shoot back. Now you might say, just go play builds mode. Well, I don't want to, okay? Zero builds is just as popular as builds, and even though it's seen as the more casual game mode, I think Epic needs to consider game balance across all modes. But it's hard to do that with these scoped ARs because, while they may be balanced in builds, they're almost always overpowered in zero builds. Not all scoped weapons were good though. In fact, outside of Chapter 1, almost every scoped AR or SMG fell into one of two categories: completely game-breaking or unusable. So far, I've pretty much only covered guns from the first category, but in late Chapter 4, that second category got a few more members, starting with the Scoped Burst SMG. I won't go into too much detail here, but I think it's pretty obvious why a scope on a close-ranged weapon might be a problem. The scope allowed it to be slightly more effective at long range, while being much less effective at close range, you know, the place where an SMG is supposed to be the best. But that doesn't mean it was good at long range either. It had a good amount of recoil, so it was hard to hit shots at range, and the damage falloff made it even worse. Perhaps in another season it would have been usable, but it existed at the same time as this behemoth, so yeah, it didn't get picked up very much. Alright, now it's time to talk about Chapter 5. Chapter 5 weapons were interesting for a few reasons. First, the weapons were now projectiles instead of hit scan. This means it was generally harder to deal consistent damage at range because you had to lead your shots. On top of that, the guns had a lot more recoil than the ones prior. And finally, every weapon could hold any sight you wanted, so really every AR and SMG counts for this video. Anyway, the bullet drop did solve some of the problems with the previous scoped guns, but it also had some unintended consequences. Since ARs were now practically useless past 100 meters, snipers became the new meta, and it just so happened that the most overpowered sniper ever was added at the same time. This encouraged everyone and their grandma to carry a sniper, and like I said before, it's never fun to be on the receiving end of that. And then there's the SMGs, which could also carry any sight you wanted. Remember what I said about the scope burst SMG? But I think it's pretty obvious why a scope on a close ranged weapon might be a problem. Well, forget I said any of that because these SMGs were really good. The red dot sight only had a 1.15 magnification, meaning you could get that 100% accuracy without sacrificing its close range usability, which is huge for an SMG. On top of that, the bullet drop that practically destroyed ARs this chapter wasn't much of an issue for the SMGs because of the short range. So yeah, we have a few more broken weapons to add to the chart. Now of course, the ARs really weren't that bad in Chapter 5 since every weapon had bullet drop, but for the sake of the argument of this video, I'm gonna put them over here. They were basically outclassed by the sniper, and for scoped ARs, which are intended for long range, they were much worse than the standard. Alright, that was pretty much the history of every first-person weapon in the game. And that brings us to today, where we once again have an overpowered, hit scan, high DPS, 100% accurate AR in the game. Damage wise, it's pretty similar to the Twin Mag from Chapter 4, which is really good. The only thing that makes it a little more balanced is the amount of movement we have this season, but without that it would be so much more ridiculous, which makes me a little nervous for Season 2 if it ends up sticking around. And don't forget about the Precision SMG. The hipfire on this thing is good enough that the scope isn't even necessary at close range, but it makes it an absolute beast at mid to long range, which is the exact opposite of what an SMG is supposed to do. Pair that with the fact that it has almost no recoil, and this thing basically turns into a sniper. So how do we solve this issue? Well, moving away from hit scan does get the job done. It's pretty clear that most players just don't like it. It kind of overcomplicates the gameplay and ruins the feel of the game. But I have a few suggestions that would very easily fix this problem. The simplest being just lower the damage. Almost every scoped AR has received a damage nerf at some point, so they're obviously aware that the damage output is too high. I don't know why they have a similar DPS to a Scar when they already have 100% accuracy. I feel like even if the Hollow Twister received a 20% damage nerf, it would still be usable by good players. Idea number 2. Give the scope guns a little bit of bloom while moving. It can even stay 100% accurate while standing still. Just adding bloom to these guns would be pointless. Scope weapons should still reward accuracy. This would just make them slightly less viable in certain situations, which might encourage some players to try different options. And my last idea is similar to number 2, but it replaces that randomness with skill. If these guns are 100% accurate, they need to have some sort of drawback, and that should be recoil. The Chapter 5 weapons had a lot of recoil, but that was kind of overkill when they already had bullet drop. Adding dramatic recoil patterns to the first-person guns would ensure that most players aren't just lasering people, but they would still be worth it to use if you are willing to learn to control it. Essentially, it would allow you to choose between a simple gun with random bloom and a powerful gun with a bit of a learning curve. That's something that current scoped weapons lack. They've been oversimplified to the point that any mediocre player can just beam you from across the map. So there, 3 simple fixes to one of the longest running problems in the game. Let me know in the comments which one you think is best. With Season 2 on the horizon, I just hope that they have something planned for the scoped ARs in this game. For me, Chapter 6 Season 1 was a near perfect season, but the Hollow Twister was just brutal to fight against. If you agree with any of the points I made here or just want to help me out, do consider dropping a sub. These videos take a lot of work to make, and I'm really close to 1,000 subs, so it'd be greatly appreciated. Anyway, that's it for now. Smash the like, smash subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.